Well, good afternoon from Sagebrush Country on Utah's Transcontinental Railroad National Byway. This 90-mile route across northern Utah goes up around the Great Salt Lake, that's behind me there, on the original Transcontinental Railroad bed. So you get to drive right on it, see the cuts and the fills, historic trestles, locations of old historic towns, and there's some cool plants and animals out here. I'll take a Sagebrush Country look at it and hope you ride along. I'm entering the byway on the east side by the Golden Spike National Monument, or at least a few miles west of that. BLM has a kiosk and a sign showing you where the byway starts. This is a curlew. They have a very long bill, if you can see that. They like to hang out in some of these wetter sagebrush country grasslands, especially in the spring. Check this flower out. This is a seagull lily, kind of famous in Utah. I think it's the Utah state flower. Has a bulb at the base you can dig up and eat. It's edible. Early pioneers dug these things up as a food source, so kind of a special flower. Just out in the spring, all the moisture this winter has them out in abundance here. Starting off, you go through some pretty large tracts of private land, and this is planted in crested wheatgrass. All right, here's another flower that's fun to see, orange globe mallow. This is a native as well. You can tell why it's orange. I mean, it's just so showy this year with, again, this extra moisture. Wow, beautiful. These are distributed across the rangeland as I'm driving by as well. Okay, been driving on this for 4 or 5 miles, and one of the things I'm initially struck with is it's kind of more special to drive on this raised railroad bed than I thought. I mean, here it's like 10 or 12 feet higher than the surrounding area. And to think that this was the original railroad bed on the Transcontinental Railroad is kind of special, kind of makes you feel cool. And then here's the opposite example. We're driving through an actual cut where they would have cut down into this bluff to make it, you know, flatter to keep the grade of the train more similar. And then, you know, there's the salt flats out there in the north part of the Great Salt Lake. We're going to be seeing a lot of that. Look, the cattle guards from 1869 look just like ours today. Imagine that. So there's already been quite a few of these little roundabout areas where you go around the original grade. In this case, there was a little wash that went through there. They would have had a tiny little bridge going across that, usually sitting on stonework, so those are no longer there and you have to drive around them. It's cool though, you can go look up to these and you can still see some of the original stonework they would have used to bridge that. Just enjoying out in the breeze. We definitely got open space now. Okay, a couple of plant things I want to point out to you here. I'm standing in a fairly sparse grassland. This is where the railroad bed is going along. Mostly cheatgrass, looks like it might be some June grass. And then I've got the Great Salt Lake to the south of me here. There's the salt beds coming up from the lake, of course, because it fluctuates. And it's at a low point now, so a lot of these are exposed. But I just wanted to point out this really green strip of shrubs that's growing right along there. And that would be greasewood. You've heard me talk about it before. It's salt tolerant, can deal with the salt in the water. So the water table would be fairly high, so it's getting more water than usual, and it can deal with it. Hence, look how well it's flourishing there. And then the lighter green out there, I'm just guessing from this distance, would be salt grass, which also is tolerant to salt water. So anyway, some kind of special vegetation zones brought on by all that salt from the Great Salt Lake. Another example where you're taking the railroad bed in a side hill cut, where they've cut into this side hill here. So it drops off pretty dramatically there on the left. I mean, not a real big deal, but it's just kind of fun. You kind of think about chugging along here and a railroad a train once upon a time. Okay, one more shrub I got to show you, especially when you're close to the Great Salt Lake and all this salt here. This is the most salt tolerant shrub that there is that grows around here. It's called pickleweed or iodine bush. It can really deal with a lot of salt. So this will be the shrub that's growing closest to the Great Salt Lake and dealing with all that salt. You know, just look how salty that soil looks. And I don't know if you can see this, but beyond this iodine bush flat is a row of denser green, which would be greasewood. It can't grow down here, but it can deal with the salt, a little less salt up in that zone. So anyway, cool transition. Just pointing out the salt flats on either side. You're definitely glad you're on a raised causeway if you're going through this kind of stuff, because you wouldn't be able to get through it otherwise. This area is called Monument, after this monument rock. A little bit of a railroad town here to service the engines, and apparently an old salt works as well that didn't last for very long out of these salt beds. This station's called 10 Mile. Looks like, according to BLM here, it was pretty much just a water tank and a building or two. Those steam locomotives needed lots of water to keep going, so they had to replenish them fairly often. What got my attention here, you know, they're going around the northern part of the Great Salt Lake here, but wherever they could just get a straight line as far as they could, of course they took advantage of it. There's an example of that. Across these long fill stretches across this greasewood playa here, I just can't help but wonder the magnitude of the task. They had to haul all of this fill in from miles away. I mean, there's nothing even close to this they could have used, and just the magnitude of the task is just amazing. Boy, there's a big long straight stretch through this greasewood flat. No end in sight yet. Really impressive stand of foxtail barley out here. A little more moisture is available, probably not as salty. Quite a few little turnoffs here and there. It's not real hard to follow, but if you keep an eye out, especially for these Transcontinental signs, they'll always point you the right way. Little bridge over the Zeus side track. There's a little side track where they could manage train traffic. I have to talk some more about crows. They are so widespread in the West now, helped by all of our infrastructure and a variety of things, and become quite a problem. They prey on a lot of native birds, eggs, a variety of things. And honestly, I don't know the difference between a crow and a raven. Looks like this one's got a little something wrong with one of his feet. Typically, crows occur in bigger flocks and ravens more individually, and ravens tend to be bigger, but I think it kind of goes back and forth as well. So this little guy at least can fly, though. Let's see if we can get him to fly. There we go. There he goes. This Peplin sighting, I think, is a good opportunity to point out, you know, you're not following the Transcontinental Railroad bed all the time. Sometimes you're kind of on a much better gravel road to the side of it. So you need to look around. You can definitely see the railroad bed going across there, that raised bed, and a culvert ditch area they would have bridged. So anyway, kind of fun to look around, see these things. So as you go west of Kelton, as the BLM warned you, the road becomes more primitive. They recommend a high clearance vehicle. I mean, it's not a bad road, but it's just nice to have a little bit extra capability as you tackle it. This is Princess Plume. It really sticks out. There's a couple feet high. A few of them in bloom here. A good cut with lots of good sagebrush on it. Example where you often have to leave the actual grade to go down around because oh, we gotta look at that. I'm no historian, so I can't tell, but here's an example where a culvert area they bridged is washed out, but that looks to me like likely original rock work. Here's a really old stone culvert, maybe original. I don't know. It looks like it could be, and the important thing is it's definitely early on in the building the railroad bed, and it's still holding the railroad bed. You can still drive across this one. Keep your eye open. You see these bricks quite a few places. This is apparently brick from the fireboxes, the locomotives. They would clean them out as they got clogged, after burning coal a period of time. Must have saved them, and then they would haul them out here and use them for fill to stabilize some of these beds. I love it. There's a lot of solitude, a lot of open space. Must have been quite a train ride across this country back in the day, exposing a lot of people to this, kind of vast amounts of open space without trees. Probably very new to a lot of them. According to BLM, this is an example of an original wood trestle bridge built as part of the original railroad. No fresh tracks since there's been a rainstorm. You can see it's washed down the road in places too. So I mean, you got to be careful, especially in these bottoms here. See the grade ahead of you, how it's going to unfold. There's a good example here. Just for long distances, especially on this western spur, just a lot of railroad ties on the side of the road. I guess it makes sense. Once they used or replaced them, they didn't ship them away, they just tossed them aside, or maybe they're still there when they ripped the rails up for World War II. Anyway, kind of interesting. Old town of Terrace. Here's their cemetery. We'll go take a closer look at it. Only about 5 or 6 headstones left in this Terrace cemetery. Apparently, unfortunately, it's been vandalized in the past. There are a couple you can still read. Here's one with a gentleman who died 1899. Well, this is what's left of Terrace, which was the largest Central Pacific town in Utah along the Transcontinental route. They say there was up to 1,000 people here once upon a time. Engine roundhouse, they could turn engines around. Pretty thriving concern once upon a time. You can see there's just old piles of bricks. Had a hotel and other kinds of buildings, and that's all that's left. Take an aerial view, see if we can see the engine roundhouse. Close up of some of the brick ruins. Town of Terrace. Must have been a substantial structure once upon a time. Here's a good example of a trestle still left, probably the biggest one I've seen. And according to my understanding, when you look at these and you see the pilings on them, see these that are square? Those are a little more modern than the round ones there, which could be even original when they put the trestle in. So it's interesting to see how they maintained it over time, replaced bad pilings as they needed to. And while we're at this site, another good example of these brick pieces they brought in from ballast. Now, these came from fireboxes of locomotives. They didn't waste them, they must have kept them. And this ballast would reduce the vibration of the locomotive and train as they came and hit this trestle here. So, really interesting spot. Hey there, little guy. On the final stretch, approaching Lucin here in a couple of miles. Boy, this far western end goes across some pretty degraded rangeland, full of halogeton and invasive. I see tumbleweed out there, a little bit of greasewood here and there, and cheatgrass and a few other things. It's really poor soil. It's just really salty. It's probably, I see some cow pies. It's still grazed, but pretty desolate stretch of landscape here on this far west side before you hit the Nevada border. Well, good evening. We made it to Lucin, all 90 miles of the Byway. Lucin here on the Utah-Nevada border is where they made the Lucin cutoff in 1904, ran the track across the Great Salt Lake, and made the rest of this loop up around the shores of the lake obsolete. So a couple of takeaways from this trip. One is I love the historical dimension of this. Thinking about the scale of the work and seeing some of the artifacts and just driving on the old railroad grade, I thought was really special. Definitely from Kelton to Lucin, it's a rougher track. You need a four-wheel drive. I ran into a rainy stretch where I was really glad I had it. But overall, you don't need to take the entire 90-mile stretch. There's various roads you could bail off, so I'd really encourage driving on a piece of it sometime in the future. And thanks again for riding along.